Good evening, good day. Greetings to you wherever you may be, in whichever time zone or reality or virtual reality or, I don't know, like alternate universe, whatever. My name is Preston Smith. I am the host of the three things basically coming to you from, I can't speak today, but coming to you from the Praga district in Warsaw from MRP Studios. And all of this courtesy of The Corners magazine, which you may see here or here on both sides of me. I'm not sure. We're going to talk about that magazine in a minute. But also from CDDI. You can find that at cddi.pl, which basically comes down to detective services and me, your licensed detective, risk intelligence. I don't like to say agent. That like gets scary fast. But you're licensed detective in Poland. And I also look at all these other countries in Central Europe. And on the three things, we analyze everything from true crime to the war in Ukraine to politics to everything in between. And there is a lot in between. And I've got a lot to bring to you. This is kind of going to be our year start. I mean, we are in 2024 edition. And the first thing, though, we're going to go through the letters because we got some letters, not as many as I'd like, but hey, I understand it. You guys, you know, New Year's, hangovers, all that kind of thing, not insinuating that you're all alcoholics. Not all of you anyway. The second thing, though, we're going to do a roundup of the year, the most important things that happen in the year and what they mean or might mean. And finally, the third thing, yes, our weekly war in Ukraine update. So we're not going to waste any other time on this. We're going to get right into the letters, which is the first thing. Now, the first thing, the letters. Now, I'm only actually going to go over two letters. I got a few more letters. I mean, you guys can write on YouTube. It turned out for a long time, I think we had our comment section on YouTube was like switched off. I don't know why we did that. Sorry about that. I've gone back to some of the letters. Some of it's spam anyway, but it is what it is. But I did get some letters, and I got some direct letters to the website, to the magazine website, which is www.thecorners.pl. And I got one which is kind of funny. I'm going to read that in a minute. But the first one is really relevant. It's from @user-ye8uk7tl2s, whatever. I actually wrote you back on the site, on the YouTube video, on the last YouTube video, but just saying, hey, we're going to talk about this because I thought about it. There's something to talk about. But the comment was, if the Serbs are wise, they won't want anything to do with the EU and run as fast as they can away from it. I hope my country breaks away from the EU and NATO to be ourselves again. This was interesting. And, you know, the kind of, you know, me sitting here in the EU, in Poland, and being generally pro-EU, although I am very critical of the EU for many, many reasons. You know, my gut reaction is, hey, don't be against. But I was thinking about this. First of all, yeah, it's your country. If you're from Serbia, it sounds like you're from Serbia. Assuming you're from Serbia, so yeah, vote how you want what you want, etc. When it comes to the EU, the only thing I would caution would be sometimes it's not so much what you're running from, but what you're running for. And I'm not sure what Serbia is really going to be running toward or for or toward if it's not running in the direction of the EU. Okay, now, if we take a look at the EU, and to be, you know, let's be critical here. Something that was originally created to be kind of an economic alliance to sort of counteract the US, North America, Canada, NAFTA, whatever you want to call it. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in the timeline, but let's just say to kind of counter the U.S. Worldwide economic powers, and eventually to, you know, there's the other direction, you know, China, etc. This was an economic alliance that became more and more and more political, etc., etc. Now, you're sitting there in Serbia, and I get it if you're in Serbia and you've just gotten hit again and again, especially this year with criticism coming from the EU, especially from Germany, but also from Holland, a lot of harping back to the war in Yugoslavia, the war in Kosovo, and of course we've had this headbutting, Kosovo, etc., etc. I get it, you're sick of it, whatever. Now, just sitting where I am in Poland, because I've been in Poland now for like almost 3 decades. Well, actually prior for like a short period before that, I was in the Czech Republic, and I kind of saw everything before the EU and after the EU. And if I was going to sum up these things just to give you a little bit to think about, right before the EU, well, before the EU, like really before the EU, there was like no cops on the street. Everything was dark. I remember living out in Eastern Poland. There were like no lights. You go to Lublin, and at night it was just dark. And if something happened, no cops were coming. I mean, if you got into a bar fight, you're just in the bar fight. And that's just the way it was. There was all kinds. We had the mafia wars, all kinds of things. Now the EU came, and a lot of things happened in the run-up to the EU and also once the EU happened. In the run-up to the EU, to tell you the truth, it was a great time to do business and be involved in business because there was a lot of anticipation from, worldwide businesses. Try to get the money in now because once it joins the EU, it'll be too late to invest. Things will be more expensive, but also if you get in first, you'll make money, etc. So the pre-EU period, which is what Serbia is not really in. It kind of, sort of is in it, but it's not now. But if Serbia made a commitment to the EU, there's going to be kind of a boom. Now, how big a boom is that going to be? Well, the EU now is not the same as it was back in the pre-2004 days. I'm referencing that because that's when Poland joined. But so there's a lot of things going on in the world. The economy is not the same, etc. But if Serbia committed to joining the EU, yeah, there's going to be a rush and you're going to get some benefits, those instant benefits of kind of prior to accession. More companies coming in, more money, better employment, people, their standard of living growing, anticipating being able to travel without visas, etc. All those things, right? And then also other things happen. Now in Poland, the government, which is no longer in power, the political party PiS, that was a different PiS that took over right at the time that Poland joined the EU. And a lot of things happened, though, that were already in process and continued once Poland joined the EU. And that was everything from adjusting to legal norms, getting more cops on the streets. Actually, you can rag on PiS, a lot of people in Poland do, but I don't think that their impact on the judicial system is all bad, at least back then. Now, what happened later, the later version of PiS and this PiS that lost it, that's a different PiS, different times, etc. But a lot of things happened that really did have a positive effect in Poland. If you don't believe it, well, it's hard to convince you because you probably weren't here before the EU, but if you come to Poland now and you go to even to smaller towns where you've got better roads, you've got infrastructure, yeah, there's a lot stolen along the way. That's just the way EU subsidies go, but there are a lot of positives. So I would caution you with that because the alternative seems to be running towards Russia. And what does that mean as we go forward? Does it, you could say, well, the Russian economy is actually still doing okay. It's geared up into a war economy, and war economies maybe have their kind of semi-booms for some people, but then when wars are over, things get tough. And also, what are they looking at after this Ukrainian war is over? Hopefully it does end pretty soon. Where do you want to go? I don't know. I would caution you with that. The one thing, though, that I do worry about a bit is the euro. Poland has not joined the euro yet. Some countries joined the euro. The euro's tough. I mean, I remember going to Crete for vacation before the euro, and it was fun. It was full. Everyone in Crete was happy. Things were going well. Then we went after it joined the euro, and all the Cretans were basically moaning that there's not as many tourists. It's not going well. Everything's expensive. Well, part of the thing is it seemed like they just changed their prices, just put a euro stamp on it. Yeah, things got really expensive fast like that. Slovakia seemed to have a tough time after the euro. Adapting to the euro is not an easy thing. So I'm a little worried about if Poland, because now the prime minister is talking about joining the euro now that we have a different government. That could be pretty tough. So not everything is easy, but hey, you asked or you commented, so those are my comments. I do understand where you're coming from, though. I do. Now, the second letter, which I'm going to address. This is a letter that was to the magazine mail. If you go to the magazine, www.thecorners.pl, you can find the email there. It's from a guy who, Bebop at Yahoo from North Carolina. I didn't even know I had a reader in North Carolina. Anyway, I don't know what his real name is. He just signed it. It said Bebop, signed Bebop, whatever. But he wrote, "Hi, you should put a comment section under your articles on the magazine site. People who read comment." Good point. We should do that. When are you coming out with the next magazine? Oh boy. Good point. We should do that too. I'm not sure. The magazine, we got off to an auspicious start, but then world events happened, a lot of things happened, and I'm just going to be honest here. The investors had to back out, one of them especially, a couple others that were looking at it. I mean, some of this is the war in Ukraine. War is war. And I've been kind of keeping it going. I'm going to actually start updating, doing the more weekly stuff again. Had just a huge workload in my real life as a detective. So I'm not sure when the next magazine, it should be coming out around now. I know it's the beginning of the year, next quarter, etc. I'm not dumping it, but hey, life is life. Now, next question. This guy wrote a lot of questions. Also, do you think you're glorifying crime and criminals a bit? I don't know, maybe a bit. I don't mean to. Some of these guys are fascinating, though, especially if you look at like the Vori, some of the hardcore mafia types. These guys live hard, live fast, get shot, die. They live their life like a movie, and I can't help it. It's like a morbid fascination. But you're right. I shouldn't glorify them. You're right about that. So another point for you. Also, did you hear about the Kinahans and boxers and their accounts? Yeah, I actually did. And this is interesting because we've talked about the drug cartels, the super cartel, the Kinahans, the Mokro or the Mokro Mafia, the Moroccan Mafia, depending on how you wanted to write it up. Their connections to Camorra, the murder of the Dutch journalist Piet de Vries a couple of years ago, etc. We'll actually talk about that a little bit more in today's show. But interesting enough, and you can find this, I'll put a link. It's in all kinds of Brit publications, lots of publications, but the Sunday World has a headline, Daniel Kinahan used boxers to launder cash with $1 million going through fighters' accounts, the court hears. Now, what court? What are we talking about? Because there are lots of courts involved. There are arrests of different associations, Johnny M., the Kinahans. MTK was, just to reverse a little bit, if you don't know about this, MTK was a big boxing promotion outfit that was working with Tyson Fury. They started to talk with Terence Crawford. They had some different UK fighters, etc. And then the U.S. came down on it when they came out with the super cartel alignment, and Daniel Kinahan was aligned with MTK. He went on the lam. A bunch of these guys went on the lam. You had, in the meanwhile, the other mafias that were supposedly in league with the Kinahans. They came under the eye with different busts. But now what they're talking about is, this is very interesting. There's a boxing manager named Moses Heredia, and he's suing. Now, it's hard to sue a guy on the lam, but he's been suing MTK and Daniel Kinahan because he said they poached one of his fighters, Jojo Diaz. Now, his allegations during this are that the money that was used to poach Jojo from him was actually money that was laundered, he said. That was actually narcotics money that was laundered, and they were using fighters' accounts to launder the money. And to tell you the truth, I don't think that if that's what is going on, I don't think they're the only ones. There are boxing promoters who are known for having their fighters not fight. That's all I'm going to say there. Very, very interesting stuff. Very interesting, but I have heard about that. Unfortunately, boxing, the mob, all kinds of things like this. This is not new news. It's kind of the history of boxing. I hate to say it. Next question. Same guy. Also, is Ukraine losing the war? It seems like it is losing, and people are putting their hopes in Trump. Oh man, talk about loaded questions. Is Ukraine losing the war? Well, I'm not going to say it's losing the war because it did get a bunch of land back, now more than a year ago. Now we've got basically a stalemate. I don't think that Ukraine a stalemate's going to last forever. Ukraine needs arms, it needs money to stay where it is. Does this mean, is it a loss? Has it lost the war if it can't take back the occupied territories? Well, I'm going to leave that up to the Ukrainians to decide. Are people putting their hopes in Trump? I don't know which people you mean. If you mean like there are Trump voters or potential Trump voters that don't want any aid to go to Ukraine, So if Trump took office, I don't see that that's actually going to help Ukraine regain its territories. In fact, he said many times that he could end the war in one day. He'd force everybody to the table, and they would all negotiate, and it would be over. Oh, yeah, well, if you really believe that, well, good luck to you. Yeah, I don't know what you mean by putting their hopes in Trump. So maybe you just mean that there's an end to the war and the U.S. can focus, if you're coming from a Republican slant, I guess you are, that they can focus on the borders. Maybe that's what you mean. And finally, are you going to start doing boxing picks again? I don't know, who are you? Who is this Bebop? How did you know I did this? Yeah, I did do boxing picks for a long time, every single week back during COVID. And for a while, I had like an 89% hit rate. Then it slumped a little because I stopped focusing on that. If you're going to do that stuff, you got to do it like all day, every day. I mean, really, you have to go find the fighters, look at the fighters, watch the films. It's actually like a job. And I did it during COVID because COVID was COVID. So I don't know if I'm going to do that, but you're not the only one that's requested it. Maybe I will. We'll see. But now, that's enough of the letters, which I'm going to say is the first thing. And you may be like, oh man, that's kind of not much of a first thing. Is a first thing because the second thing is going to get very, very in-depth because we've got a lot to talk about in the second thing. So we're going to jump to that right now and leave you on, will I start doing boxing picks again? You know, before I go to that, here's a quick boxing pick. We're looking at Artur Beterbiev. He's going to take on Callum Smith, like the Tower of Power. He was like, oh, my arms, when he fought Canelo Alvarez. But okay, but since then, he's looked great. He moved up to light heavy, and he's got just a hell of a hook. And he's going to fight Artur Beterbiev. And Artur Beterbiev is a machine. He's very technical, actually, and he just slaughters everybody. He's getting older. He's like 37 now. Can Callum Smith surprise everyone? I'm going to say that, yeah, if you're thinking about an underdog bet here, it's not that bad a pick because he's so big and because Beterbiev is getting older. And Beterbiev, he knocked out, he stopped Yard, who's a big boy himself. But the thing is, Beterbiev is kind of right there on hook level. And what Beterbiev likes to do is to throw that big looping backhand, which is kind of what caught Yard a couple times, kind of behind the head. And actually what Smith likes to do is he'll catch that and hook off it. And he's got some kind of a hook. So I don't know. I don't want to bet against Beterbiev, who stops everybody and knocks out everybody, and he's just been a terror forever. But if there was a time to do it, because the odds are going to be really in Beterbiev's favor, this might be the time. So you got yourself a boxing pick. Now let's go on to the second thing. Now the second thing really is kind of the roundup for 2023. The most important things that happened from like my perspective, because hey, I'm the one talking on this show, but from the Central European perspective, or the Three Things perspective, or the Corners magazine, like I said, this region's perspective over the past year. And these, of course, are obviously subjective, but they all have a bit of meat to them. Now, the first one, obviously, the war in Ukraine. Enough said. We're going to have the war in Ukraine update in the third thing. Second thing, war in Israel. Why? Well, one reason is because kind of changed the focus of the West, especially the U.S., when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Those two we're not going to get into. But the almost war between Serbia and Kosovo, that is an important one also for this region, and it's still ongoing. And this also gets into mass shootings and gun violence. But before we get into that, let's talk about this almost war. Now, we talked about this a ton of times over the last 6-8 months, whatever, for good reason. But what it really comes down to remarkably is what kind of set this off after all these years of this kind of uncomfortable neighborly, semi-neighborly relations, basically going back to, say, 2013, when they sort of came up with an agreement to get along. It goes back to this license plate row and the ID row, when the government of Kosovo basically said, look, it's time for Kosovo citizens, including ethnic Serbs, to switch their IDs and license plates. And then we saw all these things happen that have happened over the course of the year. protests, mutual arrests, walkouts by the Serbs in the Serb municipalities, then kind of this kind of semi-sham vote, semi-ban vote on the part of ethnic Serbs, then more protests, then Serbs putting their troops on the border, then Kosovo, in the meantime, Kosovo ramping up their own. It's kind of like a mini arms race that went on there. And then you're like, man, are these guys actually is there going to be a war? And then the EU stepping in to settle it down, and then things bumping back up, and on and on and on and on. And now what do we have? The most recent news is that the Serbs finally said, okay, look, we'll put up with the license plates. The Kosovo side, because the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti, felt kind of stupid because the Serbs actually were being cool with the license plates. He said, okay, we won't do anything about Serb license plates or put stamps on them. The license plate thing is suddenly kind of over. So all this crazy mess, what did it get us? And I mean, there was a lot of things that happened there. There was this raid in Banska when suddenly these ethnic Serbs got caught with all these SUVs and heavy weapons. They had a big shootout. All kinds of things happened over the course of the last year. But one thing happened kind of along the way was this push by the EU and the US for normalization between the two countries. So kind of ironically, all this pain and this craziness over the license plates, because the Serbs are worried that if they said, okay, we're okay with new license plates for ethnic Serbs in Kosovo and IDs and all that, that would be de facto recognizing Kosovo as an independent country, which they do not want to do. But all this has kind of led to more pressure on normalization, more pressure for Serb to recognize Kosovo, more pressure to sort of put Serbia on the track to the EU. Now, depending on where you're sitting there, is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know, we had one guy write in who said he's not happy with Serb joining the EU or going in the direction of the EU. But for a lot of people, for a lot of Serbs even that I know, that might not even want to see Kosovo recognized, they still would like to see Serbia join the EU for economic reasons, all kinds of reasons. So it's been kind of a strange year, but that has been important. Now, this leads us to mass shootings and gun violence. Now, before going back to Serbia, the most recent one obviously took place on December 21st. And this one kind of actually very close to my heart, when 14 people were killed by a postgraduate student at the main faculty of the arts building, where he just started shooting people. Now, when I first came to Central Europe, actually it was to Prague, and I went to Prague. Well, actually, then I only stayed in Prague for like a day. I moved out to Moravia, where I worked for a while. Then I came back to Prague. But this was a funny time for like Generation Xers. We're talking all the way back to the very, very early 1990s, because obviously in '89 we had the fall of the wall, we had the Velvet Revolution, we had the protests in Poland, etc. And then things changed, and there were guys who were over here before me. I didn't get here till 91, 92, 91, I guess. Gosh, man, I got to look at my resume. But there were guys that got here before that. But it was really kind of a funny time, like an innocent time. In fact, I even remember attending a university lecture where there were people that came from the Czech Republic and they could barely speak a word of English. And it was very exotic for us. I mean, one thing, okay, the girls were really pretty, and we'd all heard of Paulina Poroskova, the wife at the time of the guy in the rock band Rico Kasich, whatever, and we're like, wow, Czech, rah, Czech girls. But beyond that, it was really kind of a heady time, very innocent time. And I remember the Czech representatives coming over and said, look, we need to learn English. And so tons of people went over there just to teach English, or was kind of a way to get in and get your visa, etc. At the same time, there were tons of expats. At one point in Prague, there was probably like, I don't know, 50,000 or something like that, starting businesses, etc. Again, very innocent times, kind of hippie-esque, kind of bohemian-esque. You didn't think of violence. It wasn't a violent time. It was a time where really if you went there, you were amazed about how pretty the Czech Republic was. If you got outside of Prague, the villages, at that time, we were still like in kind of the ice age, which now I guess is over with global warming. But I remember riding a train out of Prague and seeing guys playing hockey on the river just unbelievable. You know, it kind of always looked in winter is like kind of always Christmas. That's what it looked like. And a lot of people, including me for a time, but a lot of my friends settled in the Czech Republic, permanently built lives there, etc. And something like this was not something that we thought or they thought would ever happen there. I had friends that were very close to the scene, even had children close to the scene. And you know, this is like, it's beyond just another mass shooting, which for Americans, maybe we're inured to these. They just seem to happen all the time. They do happen all the time. But there they don't. And if anything, it's kind of the end of an age for a lot of people, and my heart goes out to people who have suffered from that. And I know even people that were there or nearby and managed to avoid, you know, seeing the direct violence. One person I know, he saw it, right? He saw it. They're still in shock. The Czechs had just a few days ago, they actually had kind of a group mass protest, group hug against violence, etc. But this is, you know, one more step in a direction that we do not want to go. But this again brings us back to Serbia, because those of you that have followed the region's news, you know that back in May, there was a school shooting, which just a 13-year-old student took a gun to school. This resulted in the death of 10 individuals, including 9 students and a security guard. 6 others were injured. And then the very next day, a guy drove around in a car with automatic weapons, and he actually killed 9 individuals and left 12 others injured. And again, I have friends down there, even friends that had their kids in school nearby. Shock waves through Serbia. Now, in Serbia, this actually has impacted the country on a very political level. Because after this, we had mass protests. We had hundreds of thousands, especially in the early protests, blaming the government for glorifying violence in this gangster culture through programs on TV that were basically seen as being supported by the government. You can argue that they were supported by the government. The government says they weren't, it was just like entertainment, sign of the times, whatever. But you saw these protests, you finally saw the president of Serbia decide to dissolve parliament under pressure from these protests and have elections. We had elections in Serbia on December 17th. They were challenged, and even a few days ago there was another protest with the opposition saying there's election fraud, etc., etc. Now this has had an impact on Serbia, and it's also brought attention to some of the things that sort of had over time just sort of been accepted. This is sort of Serbia, like pressure on the media, human rights, the dominance of the government there in the media, etc. So this is not really over. It's not really over. But unfortunately, if I'm going to rank, I don't like doing this, but if you want to rank kind of the big events of the year in the region, beyond the war in Ukraine, beyond the war in Israel, like I said, we have to talk about these mass shootings. And I hope we're not going in the direction that we have seen, for example, in the States. Obviously, we're not going to get to, the types of things that go on there all the time. We're not going to see that tomorrow. But even taking another step in that direction is a scary thing. And same thing with drugs, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But let's go still further. Narco trafficking, which is what I said. We're going to talk about that. Now, narco trafficking is kind of, this is a big thing for the region, especially even for Poland, where I am. Interesting, though, is back in 2000, just a couple of years ago, 2021, we had the murder of Peter de Vries, which is featured in the Corners magazine. You can see the old issue there. Go back and read that. And I wrote that, and I noted, look, this flood of cocaine is not going to stop, and it hasn't. But one thing that happened, especially over the course of this last year, was the ECC Sky Network encryption bust, which opened up the floodgates, and investigators all through Europe are still working on that, and I imagine the DA too, etc., going through these endless mails and messages that narco gangs believed would never be broken, to the point that they were even, some of these gangs were posting films and pictures of them torturing other people, these type of just crazy stuff. And we just seen one gang after another busted. But the gaps just keep getting filled up. And there's other twists on this, because locally, the drive for, say, methamphetamine, we're seeing methamphetamine bust, for example, in Poland all the time. Local marijuana production, of course, tons of marijuana and cocaine is still being trucked, not only from Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp, but also from Spain. But we're seeing these local industries. One thing that just a bus that came out on the 28th of December, right for the end of the year, was the Polish CBS. They liquidated 3 factories that were producing false, like counterfeit medicine. They see 6 storage facilities, 50 million zlotys, a number of tons of basically counterfeit medicines. And this is one of the things that I should go back to this, because a few years ago, this was just, the region was swamped. That doesn't mean that it's really changed, because there's so much money in this. And one of the things that would tip you off if this is going on would be if the police busted a printing facility, and when they bust it, they would find packaging for medicines. And there was a time when literally in Europe, there was a very large percentage. They thought it was like more than 15% of the medicines on the shelves in our region were counterfeit. Now, that didn't mean they were completely counterfeit. One of the things that was happening was they would basically seize shipments, cut the shipments, and then get it back into legitimate circulation with false packaging, which this is the kind of thing what happens is you would, like, for example, when you take antibiotics and it just doesn't work, like you can hear in my throat right now, it just doesn't work, so you have to take another round of antibiotics, and it still doesn't work, and you go back to the doctor and you take another round of the same antibiotic, and suddenly, bam, you're well. Well, this was kind of one of the symptoms of that, because what you were getting in some cases were cut antibiotics that had been put into circulation, and so you weren't getting the full dosage, right? You're not getting the full dosage. So what does that mean? That is another step in creating resistance to antibiotics, basically, in the region and worldwide. And we don't need any of that. Let me tell you, even if you watch the episode 1 or 2 back, starting to lose my mind now when I talked about antibiotic resistance to, say, venereal diseases and all that. I mean, okay, if you're, monogamous, or you're not insane, and you're not, out there throwing your body into the wind and catching venereal diseases, okay, but other diseases, antibiotic resistant staphylococcus, staph infections, antibiotic resistance, everything from tuberculosis to just everything. This kind of thing, these kinds of guys that are making fake medicines, counterfeit medicines, and a lot of times, like I said, they're cutting real medicine to put it into, so they can still sell it and it can kind of work. This is nasty, nasty stuff. And what are they cutting it with? Then you get into a whole crazy steroid world. A flood of this stuff is going on. The whole, everything from cocaine to crack, and now we've got these other horrible things heading our way. But this is also another one. So yeah, I rank this one up there with one of the top worries of the year. Now, next one. What are we on, number 6? I think we're on number 6. I'm going to say the Polish elections. Now, why the Polish elections? Why is this a big deal? Well, one, now, before we get too far into that, we've always had seismic shifts in elections in Central Europe ever since the fall of the wall. You got one government comes in, it really almost doesn't matter which country. One government comes in, they reign for a while, they would typically collapse under corruption allegations, then another comes in, usually promising to clean it up. Bulgaria. Not the only one, though, at all. I mean, Poland, too. I got to drink a little water. Poland, too. And then the next government comes in. Maybe it goes well for a while. Then corruption allegations, or all kinds of implosions, it collapses, etc. So saying the Polish election is just some huge earthquake shifting thing in the region, that would be maybe not quite the truth, but it is a big deal. One of the reasons it's a big deal is because what it means in Poland, which I'll get into in a minute, but also what it means beyond Poland. And yeah, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to try to be objective here, not subjective. I don't think that the press in Poland has been very good at being objective in many, many years. And I'll tell you why. Back when the first round of peace got pushed out, I remember journalists that I knew celebrating, yeah, you know who you are. That's not what you do as a journalist. You don't celebrate when any political party wins or loses, unless they're actually, really are, like, trying to throw the press in jail, these types. I mean, there's legally functioning governments, and they're never always legally functioning politicians, but you know what I mean. And then there are, we're not talking about Banana Republic level here. Not quite, anyway. Now, what happened in Poland, though, and I'm going to, just recent history, put this in perspective. You have to give the former outgoing government, the Law and Justice government, and even the last, incarnation of this government credit, especially for one thing, and that was being, for a long time, a stalwart partner, supporter of Ukraine. They really were. Morawiecki, the prime minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, he just made himself probably almost hated in Western Europe, badgering and basically kind of bullying, for example, the Germans, saying, see, we told you how it was going to be, and pushing the Europeans to get serious and support Ukraine. Now, this all changed, kind of all changed at the end when suddenly the Polish government stopped getting along with Ukraine over the grain trade battles, etc. But still, I'm going to give them some credit. Now, what has happened since then, I said even actually a few shows back before Donald Tusk brought his government in and finally was able to form a government, that there was going to be some birthing pains, we might put it that way, and we are having them now in Poland. We've had everything from fights and mutual accusations with regard to TVP1, the national television station. Now we've got one of the peace founders, Jarosław Kaczynski, also former prime minister, basically saying that there's a plan to Germanize Poland, and he wants to have protests for democracy. These kinds of things which are going on are not pretty, but they're really kind of expected. But this is a sea change in Poland, and it probably is going to get Poland a little bit kind of better in the books of getting along with the EU, etc. That doesn't mean I don't think any political party is all good. I don't think any coalition hangs together forever. I don't think any of this stuff, I'm not going to say this party is horrible and that party is great, because I never see a party, especially in this region, that is great. I see them all come up short. Maybe the KO-led coalition, maybe that's going to change things. I'm not so sure. But one thing that did happen, which is good news for Ukraine anyway, and it's good news for Polish truckers if it goes through, is that the big trucking protest on the border looks like it is over. Of course, the Polish government promised some subsidies, and these subsidies have to get through the EU, so we're not sure yet. But this should mean that supplies, aid, logistics, everything is going to start moving between the two countries again, which is not a bad thing. So I think, hey, that's potentially really good news. Now, if we go just a tiny bit further, there are some other things that are happening in the region that I could name. We could talk about the return of Smer and the Robert Fico government in Slovakia, some things which are really making me worried there. I'm going to put up a link where journalists feel like they're being targeted, which is ironic because it wasn't that long ago that we saw the killing of a journalist, Jan Kuciak, and his partner, who they were murdered. They were just shot in cold blood. And this was linked to all kinds of things. I'm not going to go back to that now. I did cover that in the first edition of the corners. You can go read all about it. I may do an update in an upcoming show. Now journalists feel like they're very, very, very much under pressure there. They're being demonized. And one of the stats I saw in an article, which I guess I'll put up here, it's in The Guardian, was that something only like 37% of Slovaks trust the press, which is amazing. It's amazing because if you take a look, you'd think that more would trust the press. Maybe not trusting the press to get every little detail right, but man, I mean, a lot of this stuff was proven right. When a guy gets shot over mafia, political links, and all the dirt, everything going back to even things like the guerrilla affair. And then when you see the other things that happen, then you would think that people would put more trust in the press. And when you see that the trust in the press just becomes less and less and less, that just means that your country is headed for more trouble. The fourth estate, right? I mean, the media is needed. And across the region, we're seeing problems with the media. In different parts of the media, just attacks on the media. The media is not getting better. It's not getting more support. We are seeing some more kind of maybe a rebirth of investigative news. But on the other hand, yeah, I got to worry about this. But finally, the last thing, I'm not even sure where I'm going to rank this, but over the years, scams, endless scams. These are things that can hit you. We talked about some of these on the show, but scams you get, on your phone. Don't hit those links. People getting scammed into investments. People getting scammed out of big time money. Just it's on and on and on. And that entire sector, because it is a sector, these guys invest millions and millions and millions to rip off Europeans for billions. And we'll highlight some of those in ensuing shows. But that's all of the second thing. There's a lot of things in that I know to think about. But it was a rough and tumble year, and I think 2024 is going to be more of the same. But with that, to end the second thing, let's get into the third thing, which is the war in Ukraine update. Now the third thing, the war in Ukraine update. Okay, there's a lot to talk about going into 2024. There's a great deal weighing on my mind. I'm sure there is a ton weighing on the mind of Ukrainians, and even plenty on the mind of Americans and Europeans in the West that are debating aid, trying to get more aid. Now, I will say the Europeans are kind of stepping up now. Germany's stepping up. Some of the Baltic states have always done as much as they can. The UK, man, I've got to give them credit for a country that, Brexit, they left, etc. But they are definitely, I would say, on Ukraine's side. The U.S., we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we get into that, and before we get into some of the things that really do worry me, well, this actually does worry me too, I want to talk about some of the coverage that you're seeing on the different blogs, vlogs, etc. out there. And let's try to put a little of that into perspective, especially when it comes to Ukraine and its lack of men and this alleged kind of battle between Zaluzhny, who's the head of the chief of staff in Ukraine, and Zelensky, who's obviously the president. Now, we have seen some things happen, and these are symptoms. So you cannot underestimate that there is a bit of a conflict between both sides. One of those is that we had a while back, we mentioned this when Zelensky came out and he said the war's in a stalemate. Come on, that was back, I think he said that in October. We're now in January. It does look like a stalemate. The Ukrainian offensive didn't really achieve very much. Let's just call it what it is. They did make some small gains, put pressure on the Russians, etc. But as far as, for example, down in Zaporizhia, going all the way to Tokmak, to basically, or regaining, the lost territories in Donetsk and all that. Well, hey, we didn't see it. A lot of guys lost their lives. There were extreme costs. Now, the Russians have maybe lost, in terms of killed and casualties, 350,000. That might not be an overestimate. That's a huge, huge number. On the flip side, we have seen Russia just gear up and turn basically into a war economy. And now they're putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians. None of that stuff is new, but let's get back to the men. Now, one of the things that has come up again and again and again is that Zaluzhny has basically said, we need men. Okay, now, we're going to put this into perspective too. He has denied since then, saying, I need 500,000 men. I wouldn't have come out and said a specific number anyway. But this kind of does indicate that there is some tension between him and Zelensky, because Zelensky came out and basically said that Zaluzhny said that they need 500,000. He said he wanted to see 500,000 or 600,000 men. I want to see justification for this. Why do you need so many, etc.? That does kind of indicate that there's a conflict, because it's the kind of thing you're like, hey, boy, we're getting out all this. You're kind of airing your worries. I don't want to say dirty laundry, but airing your worries in public during wartime. Okay. Again, let's put this in perspective, though. Okay. What we have seen since then, especially recently, are mainly the Russian bloggers, the vlogs that I would say side with Russia, saying that Zelensky's panicking, he doesn't have enough men, he doesn't have, this is like the end of the world here. Now, when you see debates in parliaments, it doesn't matter if it's Ukrainian parliament, U.S. parliament, U.S. Congress, UK parliament, anywhere, these are going to be quite emotional. So when you see a vlog, or and maybe it's in English, but it's like a Russian blog saying, here's a shot, and it might be of Zelensky, might be of someone else saying, getting very histrionic when it comes to the needs. You got to remember that's in a debate where in Parliament, where in European parliaments especially, more so than in the U.S., they shout at each other, yell at each other. Of course, you get into some of the stands, and they might start duking it out, whatever. But you got to kind of put that in perspective. Now, is there a shortage of men in Ukraine? Well, if we're going to say, some of the stats have come out, I don't know whether to believe these or not. I kind of tend to, that the average age on the line is like 40. I don't know if I believe that. But still, it's not young. It's not young. Then you'd say, yeah, there's a bit of an issue. When they have talked about dropping the age of the draft, and Ukraine has publicly said, and Zelensky said, that they're not happy with the way the draft offices have been working. There have been allegations of corruption in some. There are plenty of stories of Ukrainian guys avoiding the draft, trying to leave the country. There are tons of Ukrainian guys in Poland that probably are of age, and in other countries in Europe, they don't want to go fight. I can understand it. Scary. Some of the things that come back from the front line are just horrific. And there are plenty of stories saying that the patriots, the Ukrainians that went straight to the front line of fight, a lot of them, they're dead, injured, or, they've just been in combat too long. So yeah, is there a worry when it comes to men? Yeah, I would say that the biggest worry is that there's just not enough men to mount a counteroffensive that's going to do much. And on the flip side, you've got Russia, they've got at least a 3-to-1 advantage, and they are gearing up. So I wouldn't toss all this into the trash can and say none of it's true. On the other hand, you can't take debate and suddenly say that Zelensky's panicked, or that, it's all melted down. Debate is debate, and this is where I really kind of differ in opinion when you get into the Ukrainian issue. Now, what we are seeing, though, is that when it comes to the money, from the U.S., it's done. It's over. The last of the money is gone, as you can see by the headline here, wherever Evgeny puts it. And now there are negotiations in the U.S. Senate of a bipartisan group trying to come together to figure out what they're going to do to try to get aid to Ukraine. But this all hinges still on the southern border, on the Democrats getting serious in the eyes of the Republicans of stopping the influx of illegal aliens. I just don't expect that to happen fast. So in a way, none of this is good news. Now there's some more news. Now this is what weighs heaviest on my mind right now. You remember several times over the past few months, I've said that I'm anticipating a big push by the Russians, really about now, January, February. And what we're starting to see, and this is not just me, it's coming out in places like the Telegraph, where they're starting to say the Ukrainians are expecting this and worried about this in Kharkiv. Now, if you take, we'll take a look at the maps in a minute, but when we do, you'll see kind of the entire, that crescent of the Ukrainian front. And you've seen intense battles for months and months of the first part of 2000, or really 2/3 of 2023. You had the Ukrainians pushing hard, but since, say, October, we've had a real push by the Russians, which is just still mounting, and you can question their tactics, and some of it's just suicidal. Tens of thousands of guys dying in just straight ahead attacks on Ukrainian positions. But there's no doubt that the Russians have decided to seize on the limited aid from the U.S. especially, and to try to basically probably make the U.S. think that it's a lost cause and it's wasted money, or at least voters in the U.S., etc. But they're pushing. But if the Russians mount a real offensive that is well planned in Kharkiv, this is like essentially now it would be almost like a new front. Things at that time are going to be tough. Now, one of the reasons why I do believe this is coming, and I'm not the only one, that the Russians are going to try to do something in Kharkiv, is because of the activities up in Belgorod. Now, there was kind of a crazy, unbelievable instance where a Ukrainian saboteur blew up a Russian military plane like 1,000 kilometers into Russia, and he basically filmed himself doing it. I think Russians going to face more of this kind of thing. But what we have seen are these attacks by Ukrainians on Belgorod. There was the Ukrainians hit Belgorod with drones. The Russians said there were like 24 civilians killed. This was before Christmas. The Russians came back in basically horrific style, hitting civilian targets in Ukraine. And if you talk to people from Kharkiv, they're saying that there's much more, there are many more Russian rocket attacks now than there have been in the past. And it looks like the activities are growing. There was also a Ukrainian kind of a saboteur group went in to attack Belgorod, to mine the main road in and out because Russian general was coming there. This type of thing seems to me as a prelude. The Ukrainians know what the Russians want to do. The Russians have their plans. And yeah, I would be worried and am worried about basically a new offensive coming in Kharkiv, or also the Russians getting even more serious in Kupiansk. Now, with that, let's turn to the maps. Okay, now you see on this first map, just like always, I'm just showing you the whole map. On this one, I kind of like blew it up so you see basically just how big Ukraine is and where they're fighting. And it's, you're like, wow, the front is a long, long, long way from Lviv. That said, the Russians have been hitting Lviv and Kiev, and it's somewhat arbitrarily. My heart goes out to a friend of mine whose friend went to Dnipro. Seemed like it was pretty calm there. Dnipro was hit recently. We don't know what's happened with her, but I hope she is safe. But it's just, it's a big country, but the war is the war, and it's affecting everybody. Now, you can see, again, just by the concentration of these diamonds, which are basically Russian units, you've got down Kherson, then you got Zaporizhia. You follow the crescent up all the way up. You're going to go up. You can't see where it's written there, but you can just imagine you're going up eventually from Zaporizhia to all the way up to Kupiansk, and then you see Kharkiv, where you don't see a lot happening, but you see Kharkiv and Belgorod. If you take a look at this next map very quickly, you see how close. They're just right across the border. Interesting is, back in the summer, there were reports of Russian kind of Spetsnaz types getting into Sumy and doing little raids there. So I'm not saying this stuff is not thought out or it's not coming. I'm worried that it is coming. And there have been basically public reports that the Ukrainians are worried too. Now, let's go down to Kherson. Here's Kherson. Interesting on the deep state maps, which is what I usually fall back on because they are very good at double checking everything. They were kind of blurred and they weren't really showing Krinky. But if you kind of go up in the direction, you see Kherson, you follow the river up towards Antonivka, that gives you an eye of where it is. Here's an old map of Krinky. There have been reports coming out of Ukrainian soldiers complaining about how difficult that is. I have no doubt that is not a lot of progress there, but the Russians trying to get the Ukrainians out, and the Ukrainians punishing the Russians who are trying to get the Ukrainians out. So I don't have a lot of news to tell you there, not a lot of updates. The same is true if we go to Zaporizhia and we go to Robotny. Now, I want you, we're going to take a look at this map, and I'm also going to show you a previous map. This is the first map, this first map that you're looking at right now. This is Robotnya currently. And you can see by the arrows the Russian pressure, and they're pushing up from Novoprokopivka, they're pushing from the west towards Robotnya. You see where Verbovy is, you don't see the gray there anymore. And you see this kind of concerted pressure coming from the Russians on all sides. If you go to the next map, that's an old map from the heady days back. I think this was all the way back in August, or at least during the summer, when the Ukrainians were making gains, and we're hoping that they could maybe break through around Verbovy, turn that corner and head for Tokmak. You can see the difference. You know, like I said, we got to look at things how they are. The Ukrainians are on the defensive, and they are digging in. Same type of thing. This is just a very quick glance at Staromayorsk or Rozaini. Here you haven't seen the Ukrainians make a lot of gains, but you haven't seen the Russians make gains either. Just showing you that, because there was a time, and I'll show you the old map, when again, we had a lot of advances in Staromayorsk. This is what happens when you just don't get the ammunition and the supplies that you need. And the West, really needs to think about, what are we looking at here? What are we, they were counting on us, what we're doing. You may vote one way or another, but this for me is worrying, disheartening to see. Now, if we go up further, Novomikhailivka, Marinka, basically I'm just going to go ahead and say the Russians have taken most of Marinka. We're not going to get into that, but we've got the Russians pushing hard at Novomikhailivka and also at Staromikhailivka, near Krasnohorivka. Not a lot of good news. This is a close-up of Marinka. Actually, let's talk about that very, very quickly. As I said last week, the Russians are driving, and you can see this sort of tree line. There are very intense battles going there. The Russians are going to have a hard time moving through there because, as we talked about, when you get into forested areas or areas with these tree lines, that's where guys get dug in. It's hard to get them out. If these little villages, the Russians can just flatten, and there's just nothing left. There's nowhere to hide. Once the Russians tried to drive out across fields, open fields, they get droned, just like the Ukrainians were getting droned once they hit open fields. This doesn't mean that there's not a risk of, if there's a breakthrough and then the Russians just making a hard drive, because drone operators, on the flip side, they don't have endless range. And so, when you see these types of situations, it's hard. Once things are kind of out of range of drone operators, well, then they don't have that coverage. It'd be hard to slow a mechanized offensive down, but we aren't seeing anything yet that would indicate that the Russians are able to do that. So when we look at Marinka, we say, yeah, the Russians have taken it, but driving still further quickly along that tree line towards Herorivka, I think is a little bit unrealistic. So let's go up to Avdiivka. Wow. Now here's one where the Russians have thrown for months now, thrown everything they have at this. They've lost a lot of troops, but they are making gains. This is another one. You see this map. Let's go to an old map, close up, and a new map, okay? You can see the difference between the old map. Here's the old map. This is where this was only maybe 3-4 weeks ago, when, we saw the Russians really pressing and heading up in the north from Krasnohorivka towards Verdy, which we were talking about in Svatovi, that the Ukrainians did not want to lose that, but they're also pushing up from the south and pushing from the direction of Mineralny, I guess we could call it that, into the industrial district, okay? Now, here is the new map, and you can see that there's a difference just in the general shape and the gains. If you take a look at the industrial district that I was just talking about, the Russians have made gains. But if you really take a look at if you go up to north, one, you see that the Russians have pushed down somewhat. They've put pressure on Verdy and where Svatov is, although they have not taken that yet. But they're pushing very hard in the north, kind of up where you see Novobakhmutivka. This is a bit of a worry for me. I'm not sure how dug in the Ukrainians are yet, and I am sure that the Russians are doing everything they can right now, and they're still throwing troops to make gains here. Now, if they're going to make, if we take a closer look in the northern part on the next map, you see Berdichi Stepove. And it's getting harder and harder for sure for the Ukrainians to get supplies into Avdiivka itself to stop that from being taken. I think maybe at this point, this is another one of those instances. I mean, Avdiivka has just been blown to bits, just like a lot of these cities are. This is one of these instances where it's a huge political issue. Ukraine does not want to lose this city. Is there going to be a point where they're going to try to pull guys out? They haven't yet, and I thought they would have to much sooner. So you've got to give the Ukrainians credit. But where the Russians are seem to be making gains is up past Krasnohorivka in the north. And maybe I do believe they're putting a lot of pressure on Stepove, Berdichi to try to cut that line. But they also seem to be driving hard in the north, which does not bode well. Here's another shot of that, and you see what a little bit of a close-up there. Now, if we get back to the Kharkiv argument, if the Russians do what I think they're going to do and start pressing in Kharkiv, that makes everyone's life down here much different and much more perilous. This is what I'm mostly worried about. Now, we're going to go further north to Bakhmut. I'm not going to talk a lot about Bakhmut, except that we still have the Russians pressing hard there. You can see where they are north of Klishevka. They're pushing hard there. They're pushing hard actually in the north of Bakhmut. The Russians are basically putting as much pressure as they can on the Ukrainians on all fronts. If you go still further north, of Bakhmut, here's a bit of a close-up up towards in the direction of Kalinivka, a little bit south of Hilorivka. You see what I'm talking about. Now, if we go up towards further north, we're getting up towards to Lyshansk, Svatove front. You've got the Kreminna front and I've kind of ignored this front for a long time because not that much was happening there. But now it looks like the Russians are really throwing a lot at that front as well. Like I said, it just seems that there's pressure everywhere. Finally, we're going to go up to Senkivka. I don't have anything to add here because I don't have any new news, not a lot of updates, only that they're still pressing for Senkivka. They're still not getting anywhere. What I think is going to happen, though, is that we're going to have some news over the next few weeks of a new Russian offensive that, like I said, may come in Kharkiv. I'm really hoping I'm wrong. In the meantime, heart goes out to the Ukrainians, to the citizenry who have to just be sick to death of the constant bombardment, privations. When it it's a hard winter right now. It's really cold where I'm in Poland, but also to the fighters on the front lines because this is tough going. Otherwise, that's it. That's the three things, the first three things of the new year. A little bit of a New Year roundup. Good luck. I hope that that everyone has a better year than 2023. 2022 was tough, and we had the COVID years and all that. 2023, I remember when it started thinking, man, this has got to be better, and it was pretty tough. But I hope 2024 sincerely goes best for all of y'all. I hope we see some peace in the world, that things calm down, that people come to their senses, that the Russians actually do a double think. And I mean, gosh, these guys almost speak the same language. It's amazing that what is happening is still happening in this day and age. Otherwise, I wish peace, and I wish that you get started with a great year, that you don't fall victim to any of the stuff that I've been talking about. Otherwise, over and out. Bye-bye. Ciao, cześć, na and see ya.